Welcome back from the lunch break, guys. We're going to start with a panel on pitching and the science of analytics. My name is Hendrik Hers. I'm a scouting analyst for the Baltimore Orioles, and I'm happy to introduce a tremendous panelists that we have for you guys. First, Nick Pollack. He's the founder of Pitchers List. Alex Fast. He is the VP of Pitchers List. Rob Dougherty, who is the president of Sports Info Solutions. And then we have Luke Collis, co-founder and head product for Mustard, and Jordan Kutzer, who is the head product designer for Mustard. First, I wanted to start off by asking you guys how you got into baseball, got into industry. You've each carved out a unique role, and I know a lot of people on this in this conference would be curious to hear how you got to where you are and how your businesses are thriving in the industry. Alex, you want to start off since you're first panel?
Yeah, sure. I'll let Nick kind of handle, a majority of how the Pitcher List, how Pitcher List as a company took off, because he's the CEO. That's his baby. I guess what I'll say is I'll come at it from a backwards approach in that, for the first 8 to 10 years for myself out of college, I was an actor living in New York City. I had nothing to do really with the baseball world. Fantasy baseball was something that I did in the periphery with my friends. It was something that I was really interested in, but something that I didn't really pursue as seriously. And I really started diving in really intently and really sincerely, probably in the past 5 or 6 years. So I kind of came about it in a roundabout way, ended up going to grad school, primarily focusing on new tech, AR and VR, and then how that could theoretically be applied to baseball. And then won a hackathon based off something that I made and started working at MLB as a result of that. So yeah, I kind of took a weird path to where I am today.
And I think, the more people you meet in this industry, the more you would hear stories like that it's not traditional.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that's also the important thing, and obviously plenty of others need to talk about how they got into it. But the last thing I'll say about it is this industry is smaller than you think. Remember that in every interaction that you have, everyone that you're going to meet at some point later on down the road. And that's a really, really important thing to keep in the back of your mind.
And I think personally that is, that holds true when I, first saw the names on the panel. I mean, I had a Zoom call not too long ago with Mustard and some of the guys on here. And then, I see Pitchers List stuff on Twitter all the time. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's Nick who coaches in a league that I used to umpire in Brooklyn. So it's a small world. So let's go on to someone else so they can let Nick go next, I guess.
Okay, you were an umpire at 70th Precinct with the Bulldogs, and oh my God, I'm sure you were the best ump, and I never said anything to you when you were against me. But yeah, no, I mean, I was a college pitcher in Brandeis. I topped out my best day, an 84 or so. I had the worst mechanics, all that stuff, and then became a travel baseball coach, gave pitching lessons as well. I just kind of fell into this where I come at it from my friends were beating me in fantasy, and I was really upset about it. And I had my Fangraphs renaissance, as we all do at some point, where you understand, sabermetrics and all these stats and stuff. And eventually I still had the side of it where after playing for so long, there was a human element that my friends were missing. They were just seeing the spreadsheet. They were seeing just the numbers and just living on that. And I was trying to explain the variance, like why they could not just be a 1-5 whip guy forever. What are the things that are good about them, and highlighting those little nuances. And so I started, it was Pitcher Gifts in 2014, because I wanted a GIF database where you can actually see the players as they pitch, a GIF of every single pitch that every player throws. And I felt like that was kind of the merge between, the spreadsheet numbers and the old school eye test, right? And you need to have both elements, because there are benefits to both. I think we still haven't quite quantified about the old school method. That's kind of where I came from with it. I got really lucky in that I was a computer science minor. And I had a job where I built some basic WordPress sites. So I just had all these different really skill sets and threw them all together. And it's just one of those things where, yeah, as Fast said, like, this is an incredibly small community. And I've found so many amazing people to help, like Alex sending me a random email in 2016, star-eyed and enthusiastic, that I still keep and read to myself every night. But it's just one of those things that, there is a lot more opportunity now, I think, in the baseball world than there ever has been, with how much data and communication there is. And yeah, it's very strange how it just kind of kept going over, I guess, 7 years now. But it all starts from that place of, hey, there's a thing that I need to talk about and showcase, and just kind of goes from there.
Yeah, the barriers are broken down a bit today because of the data, and everyone values it. And if you can get your hands on it and you can make something useful of it, someone will listen.
Absolutely. And the communication's easier, right? Starting a Medium blog, for example, or talking to someone on Twitter. I mean, all the people that have been in this industry for 20 plus years or so, they had to start at the local paper, or along those lines. And it's just not the same now. It's a lot more accessible in this way, which opens the doors for a lot more people.
Awesome. Who's ready to step up? Luke?
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead. I actually kind of echo what everyone else says. The way I got into this was totally random. I got into it by playing football. So I got into baseball by playing football, naturally. But really, that's how I met Tom House. I started working with him for football. And it was so interesting, just like seeing all of the lessons that I applied as a football quarterback to football, like how they applied to baseball and vice versa. And like really that the only differences between throwing a football and throwing a baseball are the timing and the foot strike, and the stride length. That's basically it. And so kind of seeing those applications and seeing how like the biomechanical sequence applies to both was I think probably my introduction into both of them. I did play baseball in high school, so don't totally discount me there. But yeah, and then in terms of being successful, that's actually an interesting one for me, especially probably for like any athlete. We very much like to measure like wins and losses. Certainly I do. And so what I really like about Mustard and about our mission is we want to make sure that this elite coaching that like people can give when they have a 3D biomechanical analysis and like everything you can do off of that, we want to give that to everybody. And so like that's my win. Obviously how we measure success in that can vary, but like we want to get to there. And I'm certainly not going to be like, yeah, I'm successful until there's some large swath of that that's completed.
Yeah, the Tom House tree of people who have worked with him is very long. So
you got another one.
Yeah.
You got another one with Jordan.
Yeah. So I guess how I got into the business of sports, I loved baseball from like a very early age. Like my mom talks about like pulling me, or like having me pull her outside to like play catch and like hit when I was like 2 years old. Just always loved the game. I ended up being good enough to go to Stanford and having an opportunity. I was never the best, like especially in college. I hardly played, but I essentially found myself in a position where I needed to figure out how to get on the field. And I had met Tom House when I was 11 years old, and I returned back to him my sophomore summer of college, and I was throwing like 86 to 88 kind of, and I went to Tom, and this is actually where I first met Luke, and we worked out together for about a month, and I went from throwing like 86 to 88 to like 96 to 100. And so I had this really direct experience of kind of the final form of what Tom teaches. And I went back to school. I ended up getting injured just like in this really freak way, and had to like have the honest conversation of, oh, my baseball career is over, and now I need to go on and do the next thing. So it's hilarious, Alex, that you were like, yeah, I was messing around in VR. There was a class that I was taking where the teacher basically said, I'll give you an A if you make a video game in VR. I built this VR drag racing game. Luckily, I got the A. I ended up the game ended up being seen by a company that was starting at Stanford called Striver, and I ended up being the first employee there, working with the Temple football team and a bunch of NFL and NCAA teams with using virtual reality to train and be more efficient. And then we grew to work with a bunch of enterprise companies, Walmart, and then I was kind of looking for my next thing, and I reached out to Luke and his brother Rocky and Tom, and they were working on Mustard, and I said, "This is great. I would love to work on this." And I think also Nick, you said you were giving like private lessons. I was doing the same thing, and the kids who I was working with, I'd worked with them for like 4 or 5 years, and I just saw the power of giving this information to people earlier and earlier at than when you're in college, and I just said, Mustard, being able to give this information to everybody just through your phone, that this is a huge opportunity. So that's kind of how I ended up in this space.
Awesome. Last but not least, Rob.
Oh, thank you. So I answered this question kind of in depth at the Sabre Analytics conference. So I don't want to reiterate everything. So what I wanted to, I guess, talk about is the fact that just pretty much like everyone here, baseball is a passion. So growing up, I played a lot of sports, but baseball was always my primary sport. Everything else was a secondary. And I started when I was like 4, and was playing right-handed initially, and didn't have a lot of accuracy. And they realized by the time I was 5 that I was better as a left-hander. And what came out of that then was you always kind of get that opportunity to try to pitch when you're left-handed, and I loved pitching. I really had dreams of basically being a professional ball player and being a starting pitcher. However, I shredded my arm before I was probably 13, somewhere between 12 and 13. I already, I'd blown out my rotator cuff. I was throwing a devastating slider long before I ever should have been. I had coaches, my father, but basically just saying, you got to prove yourself, throw hard, throw everything, make a name for yourself. And by the time I was like 14, I was pretty much just focusing on track and other sports. However, the love, that passion, that you can't remove that from an individual. And, I looked at stuff and one, I thought, hey, maybe they should have seen that there was something off on my mechanics. Maybe there should be different ways that we're addressing how we, teach hitters, how we teach pitchers in order to play ball. I was never a home run hitter at the plate. So when my pitching career was done, I was more of a contact guy, get on base, move things forward. That small ball mentality, it was probably another decade before that became something that people could look at and say, okay, you can manufacture, generate runs. But, the point was that I couldn't remove that love, that passion. So, I wanted to try to break into sports. I started in politics, doing quantitative analysis, worked my way over into journalism. But I always loved tech and I always loved numbers. So I was always, trying to look at stuff, and I spent a lot of time reading Bill James, spent a lot of time, reading what John Dewan was doing there at Stats Inc. And, and then what happened out of that was I got my break in 2000 to get into sports. And then about 15 years later, I got my chance to get to Sports Info Solutions. Now, they started in 2001 as Baseball Info Solutions when John Dewan sold Stats Inc. to Rupert Murdoch and Fox. He had decided that, along with Bill James, they wanted to create a company that went really deep into analytics as opposed to broad across all sports. Stats Inc. is also the company that got in the lawsuit with the NBA that created the legality of what is the industry we look at now. So when the company formed, as usual, there's a lot of missteps. It took about 5 years to realize that building proprietary data input software is a really good business move in this industry. You can take off-the-shelf software and you can try to modify it. But if you really want to satisfy your customers, you've got to be able to work with a malleable code base. And you've got to gather very granular data for your customers. right? So you need to build databases. You got to take that tech aspect and make sure that you can work with very minute data points so that you can get researchers and analysts to work with the data to help you create products, right? And the key in business is then economies of scale. And I'm sure you're running into this in numerous business courses, right? You got to be able to come up with a technique in production that can allow you to get a cost-effective model out to teams, agents, whatever it is. I'll give one example. Command charting and other things where video is getting broken down. That became clear 15 years ago that that could be a viable business model. You could break down all that data, pay a whole sea of scouts once, and then sell it, to every team or players association or whatever, or to players themselves. So you can gather all that and then sell it multiple times and be able to be more cost effective than if one organization, even a deep pocket organization, is going to see that as a limited ROI on spending all that money to do it themselves. So come up with a business model where you're actually coming up with a product that can help a team, can help a client be able in a cost-effective manner get the data they need, and give them options, raw data, visualizations, work things in a way where if they have analysts, let them be able to work with the data. Let it get into Tableau and all so that they can be able to get compelling business reasons to get other actions done and other investments done within their front office. And you need to communicate, right? You got to talk with those clients and determine it's an ever moving mark there, right? What they need in 1 year may be solved internally the next. You've got to be willing to iterate, evolve the product, and that comes through communication. So as you're trying to build a market with products, make sure that you don't lose track of the fact that in 1 year, they want this. And so you spend 3 years building that, but by the time you go to market, well, that's not what they want at that point. So don't lose sight of where you need to be, or you're going to invest a lot of money in a way that's not going to be able to create a compelling product. Other people in the industry, and there's lots of people who want to dive in here, they're going to lap you. They're gonna be able to figure out how to secure that for you. And so, if you really want to get in here and you want to look at this from a business perspective, you don't want to lose sight on the fact that you have to provide products that your customers want. And that's a key for our organization. We go to spring training every year. We meet with all the teams at the complexes. I enjoy, I meet with Sig and the other guys there in your front office, and it's great. Wonderful feedback. Be open, right? Just get critical feedback. You might be in love with something you're trying to pitch, but if the team just says to you honestly, that's not really what we're looking for. Don't keep trying to just insist, well, you're seeing it wrong. You should want this. Well, that's going to build resentment. You're going to have difficulty on the next product. So you want to take a look at that. And then ultimately, it's based on your employees, giving them opportunity, making commitment, and being able to keep that interaction then with your client base, really fresh, and make it an environment where everyone is enjoying what they're doing. Because passion drives and fuels that innovation. When you're working those long hours and you're trying to make your client happy, you want to end up doing each of those steps. So I hope this wasn't too long-winded, Henrik, but for a business conference, my guys internally in our R&D department insisted that I stress some of these key components to everyone who's participating here. And I don't mean amongst us as the talkers, but everyone who's sitting here, right? Because you've got this wonderful opportunity now as you're working your way out of Temple to be able to embrace the audience and just be prepared to listen, evolve. Communication is so important out there. And the better that you listen, the better that you can be able to help create opportunities for the people you work with and the people you want to serve as your customers.
Thanks, Rob. All of you guys, that's a ton of great info. You guys are a leader in stats in this industry and have employed a lot of people who have gone on to do great things in the industry. So can take a lot from what they do. I wanted to turn to some questions we had for the panel. I have a graph that I found on Twitter. You know, Twitter has become a tremendous place where info is shared, and the pitching gifts, you know, that, you know, Nick and Alex and the pitching ninja and everyone is, I'm on Twitter constantly looking at it. But this is one I found interesting, and I thought it kind of shows the revolution to some degree, just part of it that's happened in pitching. Fastball velocity, as you see, has taken off, and fastball usage has gone down. So I wanted to ask, you know, what do you guys think has led this to happen? And, you know, for the longest time, I think people in the industry have said, you can't teach velocity besides getting stronger, and you have to pitch with your fastball. Why was that so accepted for so long, and what's allowed it to change? I'll let someone grab it first.
I mean,
Yeah.
oh yeah, sorry. Okay. One thing that really it sticks out to me is that you would think, oh, you're throwing a harder fastball, that means you should throw more fastballs. But then you realize also when you increase your fastball velocity, you also increase your slider velocity too often. And you see something like Jacob deGrom throwing 94 sliders that are just absolutely unhittable. And it elevates those pitches too. And I think in many ways it's made those secondary pitches even better, more so maybe than the fastball does. That's where my first thought goes as to why we're seeing this acceptance for so many secondaries.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to bring up too is we're almost kind of missing the dance partner in this graphic, right? The thing that I think is really important is, you know, first pitch swing rates were the highest they've ever been in the last full sample size that we got in 2019, right? Batters are more aggressive than they've literally ever been, right? So as a result, you can work out of the zone with breaking pitches with a bit more frequency, right? Guys are developing movement better than they've ever done before. Guys are developing velocity because of biomechanical improvements, because of companies, you know, because of Mustard, because of Driveline. Front offices are getting smarter and making these fastball velo improvements. I mean, like, as Nick already brought up, Jacob deGrom already improved his fastball velocity from last year again, which we didn't even think was physically possible. I'm just waiting for, you know, 2087 and Jacob deGrom's throwing 138 miles an hour, reaching a new peak, and Nelson Cruz is still hitting 80 home runs.
He was averaging what, like 99 point something on his fastball on his first start?
Yeah, it's unbelievable too. But, you know, I also, you know, and we should keep going down this track, but I would be remiss if we didn't bring up the other side of the coin too, right? Just there is still a space for the Hendricks, for the Greinke, for the Dylan Bundy. There is still a space, and theoretically, I guess you could make Nick's laughing because I'm bringing up Dylan Bundy within 20 minutes of speaking. But there is a space for, as you see that fastball percent go down, to, you know, be more effective with these really disgusting breaking pitches. You know, Devin Williams can still throw 97, 98, but it's that airbender. Yeah, Kenta Maeda is another fantastic example, right? So I think, you know, it's important to, this might be kind of my theme throughout this entire talk, but none of this stuff exists in a vacuum, right? It's all so deeply, deeply, deeply contextual, and bringing in the context of first pitch swing rates and other factors, I think is really important.
You know, you guys are gonna hate me for this. Absolutely hate me, but I'm gonna bring in a story instead of a data point for this.
No, that's great.
That's great. Yeah.
So probably about like 10 years ago now, a guy that my brother actually played high school baseball with, his name was Xavier Paul. He played in the big leagues a little bit, but this was definitely back before like everybody was throwing 100, and you know, he was coming up through the ranks, and he was in Double-A, and there was this up and coming pitcher who was throwing 101, and so Xavier gets up there, and like you're saying, first pitch, home run, like longest home run he's ever hit, and then it's like, yeah, that guy was throwing 101 back when that was like really, really impressive. Like, how did you do that? And he was like, he throws 101. I knew I was going to get a fastball.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point too, right? I mean, like, why, especially think about it the other way too. You really want to wait to get to Kershaw's slider? You know what I mean? You really want to wait until you're behind 1-2, and all of a sudden you're looking at Kershaw and you can get like a curveball or a slider. So I think that, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. You got me excited.
That was basically it. Otherwise,
Yeah.
I was just going to say I really like your points about once the fastball velocity goes up, so does the slider velocity. I watched the pitching ninja tweets, and I'm like, what in the world is going on with these high 90s cutters and sliders and whatnot?
And
Yeah,
and
that
really
new-
to the I think also when it comes to actually like stat stuff, which I'm not going to actually reference a ton, I think, during this, but Alex Chamberlain put out a fantastic article about what is the expected WOBA of pitches in play, and curveballs are at the very bottom and fastballs are at the top. And I think as you see this graph, we have more access to those and more acceptance to something like that to recognize like, oh, okay, fastballs generally have worse results in play. Okay, curveballs have really good ones. Let's throw those more.
Yeah, I think the data has kind of, led to that too. If fastballs are getting hit, let's throw the other stuff a little bit more. We could probably talk all day, and I've got a long list of questions, but I wanted to ask, I thought this was kind of interesting. If you guys could design your ideal repertoire, what pitches, what pitch qualities, some of you guys did pitch, I'd be curious to hear. I'll let Jordan go first since he has got some experience.
Yeah, I loved what I threw. I threw everything hard. I didn't have anything really that slow. So I threw a four-seam fastball, but it was mainly like a sinker. And then I would throw a slider and a split change. And I just loved throwing the split change. I threw it since I was like 12 years old, and I just loved that pitch. It's not a pitch that I needed to bring out that often, but when you have it, I think that, yeah, I see you, Nick. Yeah, I got you right here. Yeah. And so I think that it's just a great pitch, and you're seeing a lot of people starting to add it. I think we saw Stroman over the offseason kind of, I love pitchers are leaking, they've got, I'm leaking that I'm adding a pitch. And he's been adding that in. I think you see Ohtani with it too. And I think any pitcher with a split change, I'm always in fan of their repertoire. I wish I could have thrown something slower. I look at guys like Strasburg with the insane changeup. I wish I could have thrown it. I just didn't. I couldn't ever do it. If I could have had a fourth pitch, that's what I would have. So that would be kind of like my ideal repertoire.
Someone else want to dream on a $100 million repertoire they might have?
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure it won't be as good as Jordan's. And actually, listen, I probably know the least about actually the ins and outs of baseball, but to me, it really is all about reaction time. So, why do guys that throw slower, how can they be successful? And to me, it's just about late movement. And why is velocity so important? Well, there's less reaction time when there's velocity. So I think any pitches where you're getting late movement, splitter, that's a good call right there. Yeah, some of those sliders I've seen recently, sinkers, love those. Yeah, anything with late movement.
I'll be a little different. I'm going to say it's not necessarily about the actual pitches, but more of what they act as. Like you want one fastball that you're confident to throw in the zone always with. And that could be really hard or it could be movement. You can get that reaction time, Luke, by lots of movement or by being really fast, right? That's what you're saying. So either one can work there. I need a secondary pitch that you can throw for a strike with confidence as well. And then I need a whiff pitch that is consistent. I'm actually kind of notorious for hating splitters because they're inconsistent. I used to throw one too. And I know how, on a given day, you get one chance of putting that ball into your fingers and you can't just call times because you want to get the ball stuffed in a second way. It's a lot harder to do that than just put your fingers on the seam in the right spot.
That's why you got to start with it there.
I know, but it's just, you don't want to do that. No one wants to do that. And it's so you see this often through guys. I'd say actually Kevin Gausman is the one rare example of that hasn't really gone through a long stretch without that splitter. But everyone else that's had one, it's like some days just like, yeah, I just don't have it today. Tanaka lost it for like a year and change, and he's supposed to have the greatest one in the world. So splitters I kind of go away from, but if it is like a fourth pitch that you can whip out randomly, then that's great. But really, it's just that fastball that's amazing that you can feel confident putting where you want. You have to have that whiff pitch, and then you have to have a secondary pitch that you can throw for a strike.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Alex. I'll let you finish up.
I was just going to say, if we're dreaming, I want I want as much velocity as possible with as much different movement profiles as possible. I want my spin directions to look like the Vitruvian Man. I don't want like something up here and I want something down there. I want every single possible thing with as many different movement profiles as possible. I think if I'm capitalizing on today's game, I want a high rise fastball, something that has as much active spin as humanly possible. And then I want something that dives straight down. I want something that dives down left and something that dives down right. And that pretty much, I think, in today's game is, that's in my mind what is so exciting about Lance McCullers is that's what I think he's trying to do this year. But that's my quick $100 million answer.
Pretty good, variety of opinions, I think. I wanted to transition a little bit just into like the training. What type of tools have you guys seen used in training that are out there to help pitchers get better, to help them stay healthy? And then maybe if you want to touch on the ideal, 12-month schedule, because I know that's talked a lot about, how can we keep pitchers healthy?
I can start with this one. I think that the number one thing that I've seen, apart from developing Mustard from a mechanical standpoint, I think it's the understanding and openness of the baseball community to kind of start quantifying basically everything. I mean, the amount of cameras, the amount of data, everything that's being captured every single baseball game. And I always think of it in terms of I like cars, so I think about it as like a concept cars. Like what you're seeing with the high end best teams in the league, that technology is eventually going to trickle down to high school, colleges, high schools, and little league. And so the number one thing I always turn to is how much force are you producing and how much can you slow it down, whether that's swinging a bat, throwing a ball. You see this, a lot of guys working with weighted balls, being able to accelerate and decelerate heavy and light balls. There's a lot of discussion on Twitter about swinging lefty and righty, especially right now with the Tatis injury. There are a lot of pitchers now who are doing a lot of rotational training using bats. And so those tools and those training methods, I mean, they're not even really tools, they're just new training methods. And then the tools like the Motosleeve, Rapsodo, Mustard, I mean, all these tools are helping to quantify what your body is actually doing as the process, not actually like the output. I think that you see like stuff like Rapsodo is the output, but Mustard and I think Motosleeve as well, that is kind of the process of what your body is actually doing that leads to the output. And I'm really excited about that piece.
I think you hit on something that's really important. The acceleration, how quickly can you accelerate and how quickly can you decelerate, both as a hitter and pitcher. I mean, look at Ohtani. He can hit a ball 115 miles an hour and he can throw a pitch 101. That's because he can accelerate extremely quickly and decelerate too, I would assume.
That was my big issue. I was a lefty swinger and a right-handed thrower. So I was when I was like struggling with my velocity, I was like the first athlete to go through this with Tom House, and we did this. He gave me golf clubs, and he said swing these, one with like a heavy weight at the end, and one with no like head at all. So it was just like the golf shaft, and I swung it lefty and righty. And when my swing velocities were equal, swinging both directions, my velocity shot through the roof. And so I think that more people are starting to utilize that. And I think, it makes sense. I mean, it feels kind of obvious once you do it.
Thanks, Jordan. I wanted to go more into like the statistical side. Like, what metrics or statistics do you guys think are the most useful when looking at pitching performance? And I want to start with Rob on this one.
Yeah, sure. So, you have your ERA estimators, things like FIP, which is fielding independent pitching. It estimates your ERA, based on your strikeouts, walks, home runs, basically evaluating things that aren't, really interacting, with what's going on with the other defensive positions. And then you take that a step further and you start looking at like DIPS, your defense independent pitching stats and such. And they're pretty good at helping to factor out the defense completely, get you some, expected batting averages and slugging percentages that are really based on, your batted ball type, where these balls are getting hit and exit velocity as far as how hard they're hit and such. And those start to get us on some of the steps forward on isolating, the pitcher's responsibility with the results. Now, evaluating pitch movement is really becoming huge. Anyone that was just at the Saber Analytics, what is that? Seam shifted wake is a huge topic right now. And hopefully we could talk a little bit about that. But in general, incorporating spin rate and movement numbers, different pitchers have different characteristics. And, overall, that can help you evaluate the repertoire. And one key thing here is at this point, you don't really know whether someone has hit their intended target or not. So one way for analyzing pitching performance, there's a tool that our company created with command charting, which is essentially, marking the XY coordinates for where the catcher has his mitt. And that's also taking into account whether there's, any kind of misdirection in there as far as maybe an initial placement here and then a quick movement. So we have people trained to take a look at where was the intended location of the pitch. So you take all those other statistics, but you also take a look at, is the guy hitting his mark? And that's very helpful for feedback then when you're kind of then looking at this from a coaching perspective. And of course, then that then lends to the real strength of some of your best catchers in baseball and how they can help a pitcher improve his own numbers. But that's a completely different topic for another day.
Yeah, to sort of echo.
Go ahead, Alex.
To echo that mentality, yesterday I was watching a Blake Snell start where long fly ball off the bat of, I think, Darren Ruff that hit off Jorge Mateo's glove and went out for a 2-run home run. That is counted as a home run in the stat sheet. Anyone who didn't watch that game looks at Blake Snell's home run per 9, home run to fly ball ratio and thinks, okay, maybe there's an error here. Looks at Darren Ruff, his Baseball Savant page, and says, okay, he's got a home run with an expected, a batting average of this as a result of it. And it just points to the importance then of dealing away with a lot of the regular analytics that you kind of grew up on, right? And I'm not saying that they don't serve a place. They do serve a place. But even, the prime thing about that Blake Snell example too is I reached out to Tom Tango and Darren Woolman and the Savant team. That's still going to show up in the expected home run category as a home run. Even though it wasn't a home run in San Diego, it will be a home run in San Diego, right? So that really brings you to the importance of expected WOBA, expected WOBA con, right? Knowing when those things stabilize, knowing how to utilize them. But as Rob, very aptly said, those things that rely really on batted ball, I think, are really crucial because they remove context that we don't necessarily need.
I would be remiss, and I know this sounds ridiculous, but I have to mention CSW. I have to. It's. I mean,
I was
it's
wondering if that was coming.
I didn't want to. I was kind of hoping Fast would do it for me. But yeah, essentially just, CSW is just called strike plus whiffs, right? You can actually look on the nuance level of by pitches to see like, hey, how often is he actually doing things that is good for him, right? Every single called strike and a swing strike is a positive for the pitcher. And you can see, it's really, really important to see kind of a trend in it to see like, is he doing that with his four seamer today? Is his curveball getting it? Is it not? And you might as well, overall, you can say, like, oh, he has a 30%. That's good. But you might actually benefit a lot more by saying, oh, his slider actually, whoa, he had a 47% today. And man, his fastball was actually really off. And then you go into what you were saying, Rob, about command, and you can actually see just even as simple as going to the Baseball Savant game feed and looking at the strike zone plot, and you can compare a guy like Scherzer, who is all of his pitches are around the zone. And then you go to someone else, and so I don't know. I don't want to throw someone under the bus, but you see all their pitches everywhere around. There are a lot more waste pitches, and you can get a sense of command just by understanding, is he grouping his pitches well together or not? But yeah, it's just an important way to be nuanced on a pitch by pitch basis there. And you just gotta focus. I don't know. You gotta focus on those little things. Like, is he doing things that are helping each time? I think is the way to go there.
Awesome. So, I mean, we've talked about a lot of the changes. What do you guys see as the biggest potential change in the future? Biggest, the next wave, the next revelation?
In terms of analytics or anything, biomechanics, or?
Go with anything. I mean, every team is trying to get advantage. Everyone's trying to get the next statistic, the next Garrett Cole, whatever you think will impact the game.
I do kind of think that the language in baseball is steadily changing around biomechanics, and even on broadcast and stuff, you hear language talking about hip and shoulder separation, talking about how people are moving. So I definitely see an explosion in that category, and just that language taking over. How it actually posits itself and positions itself in a game, I'm not prepared to make a prediction on that, but I know that it will some way have a big part in the trajectory of the game.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think biomechanics is a very important and growing area. Our company brought a kinesiologist in a few years ago to assist us with basically injury evaluation. So we started merely by just taking a look and gathering anything that could be deemed a precursor to an injury, fouling the ball off your foot, and then a week later, you're not playing, and trying to connect all those things together. And what we're really noticing is that as enough data is available from StatCast, as well as having people such as kinesiologists evaluating events, we're seeing that there are early predicators for injuries, and it's getting easier and easier for us to be able to come up with percentages of predictions of particular areas of the body that may get injured depending on position and other mechanics of the players. And that right now, more so in our football product line than our baseball, but it's the number one request when we're meeting with teams in football. And it's the number two request currently when we're meeting with teams in baseball. And it'll probably be the number one request within a year or so. And so I see so many indicators showing that if you don't handle the bodies of your athletes correctly, frankly, I think the insurance companies are driving a lot of this, because they're having to cover these astronomically high contracts in baseball. And they want to know, can that body hold up? Can those mechanics show that over a course of, you want to give a guy, $30 million a year for 9 years? What are the chances he's still going to be playing in 4 years? And sometimes you can see early indicators there. And I have a feeling it's impacting what the premiums are on insurance policies on certain players. And when things like that happen, it becomes more and more of a focus as far as how can we alleviate that at the player level, so that this way they can be healthier. And so there's a direct motivation from the agents who represent the players themselves, and the teams that are offering the contracts to be able to come up with a way to keep people healthier and playing longer at a higher level. So I think it's a natural evolution of taking a look at all these numbers and some of these amazing new systems that, Mustard, Rapsodo, and all are rolling out. Man, I wish these things existed when I could still pitch, because I don't know, maybe it would have been different for some of us, but I really see these being big movers, and people getting into this industry now. Wow, they are so lucky to have these things coming up to be able to focus on, apply their brains to, and come up with solutions for problems that have existed for decades.
And to sort of echo that too, if anyone who is listening feels like, man, I just want to get in because it feels like we're running out of things to research, there's two ways to go. One, we're not at all. We're just not. Like every day there's a new thing that you can research. Two, if you do feel that way, go to football because they're so far behind you wouldn't even imagine. Three, the last thing is finger pressure, right? Finger pressure, I think, could very well be the next big wave, right? How do we quantify that? How do we, finger pressure grips are such an important part of pitching. How do we figure that out? What's the best way to optimize finger pressure? And I know, like, sometimes when I have conversations with people, it very much feels like that old South Park joke, like the Simpsons did it, and the Dodgers probably have, and the Rays probably have, but that doesn't mean that you can't figure out new ways to look at it, right? Like, never be intimidated by the fact that an organization is probably already down that path, because you might come up with a completely new way to approach that topic. Nice little dig on football there, huh?
Yeah, that was savage right there. Luke's gonna be talking about this the rest of the day. Yeah. I'm trying to think of just one prediction. I think if I could boil it down to one thing, I think it would be kind of what you were saying, Rob. The end of secrets in baseball. I think that so many people feel they need to see a specific coach or do a specific program, and you have to, like, you got to pay up, and there's definitely some inequality within the game. And I think that if we can take the statistics and the data that we're gathering and make it available to everybody, I think it's going to unlock so much potential where someone like Rob won't sit there at the end of their career and say, did I hit my potential as an athlete? And I think that that's the most exciting thing for me is making it so that all this information is out there. The number one question that we get from people is, what am I supposed to be doing for myself every single day? And I think that we can use that data and the statistics that we're gathering to actually create those plans to help people feel like this is the blueprint. This is how I'm going to become the best baseball player, football player that we can be. And then if I can just go crazy, I think that the mental and emotional side of it, I think mental health is just like, it's such an obvious one. I think almost every professional athlete is afraid to talk about it publicly, but I think it's probably the biggest issue facing the game. These are high-level performers. They deal with anxiety on a level that few people do, and we need to be helping them and also learning from them because there's just so much unlock there.
Yeah, I think
on that point, really quickly, Fast and I joke all the time. Anytime Fast brings up the mental game, we call it Alex Think Fast. And we actually talked to Tyone last year, and he mentioned that I think they had a sleep doctor, or they essentially were monitoring his sleep schedules and all of that, which is just, at first you go, what? That's crazy. And they think, oh, wait, right. Of course, I want that. I want to be at my peak. That would be wonderful. And so that's a really good thing. That was when Pittsburgh changed their analytics department and it shifted their focus. And I think that is really helping them. And I wouldn't be surprised if you start. That could be in all 30 clubs right now. I wouldn't really know, but I can't agree more, Jordan. Emphasizing that. I think everyone is really starting to get awake a bit about mental health, and baseball is not going to be any different. They're certainly going to adapt with that.
Yeah, and with a coffee addiction needs to see a sleep doctor. Sorry,
but think about, we've seen just really quickly, we saw Greinke was out of the game because he struggled with generalized anxiety disorder. He won the Cy Young. We couldn't keep him in the game, and then there was another Dodger, I forget who it was, but he took a break and people were like, he's making $15 million a year. How could he be struggling with anxiety? And I think that, there's just so much opportunity there from the sports science and the sports psychology standpoint, too.
Michael Kopech, too.
Yeah, I think that's a tremendous way to kind of wrap up our questions, because oftentimes, we're looking at it from a statistical or, what can you do for me? What can you do for my team? And then you realize these guys are playing 162 games and they're humans and they're getting booed, getting yelled at on Twitter and all that. So I think most, if not all, teams have invested in mental health coaches and are, finally embracing that. So I think that's a great way to segue into our Q&A session. Hopefully we have some good questions for the panel. I'll go to our first one from Jared Forrest. When researching pitchers, how much weight do you put into a team's history with their development, i.e. the Pirates' incorporation of sinkers with Cole, Tyon, Morton?
Yeah, I think we're still learning. You know, I think I do definitely take into account, like, Caleb Cotham already looks like he's having an impact in Philadelphia. You know what I mean? From what we've seen from Zach Wheeler, from what we've seen from Zach Eflin, from what we've seen from Aaron Nola, those are important things to take note of. What my favorite thing to do is try and figure out what's behind the curtain. What's the organization trying to do, right? It's easier when we get the drive line guys, right? Because we have at least a glimpse of what their priority is going to be. But like, what are the Orioles working on with Grayson Rodriguez? To me, I personally think it's all change up stuff. But like, I do think identifying, you know, what organizations have had success. You know, Seattle seems like it's not an organization that gets a lot of love, but it seems like it's an organization that's really developing pitchers at quite a high level. And then on the opposite side, you know, I'm not trying to disparage any organizations because I don't know how they operate, but it seems like the White Sox didn't really have a history aside from Chris Sale from further developing some of these guys, right? And then all of a sudden they have this new pitching coach, Lucas Giolito's, and we'll see how they go from there. So I do think it's all speculative, I'll say, because we're never going to know what's going on behind these organizations. But I do think you can at least read the tea leaves a little bit, in my opinion.
There's also how they get used is part of it too, not just like their ability. Right? You have Cleveland, for example. They use their pitchers. They just say, go out there. Savali, Plesac, I mean, they were going to go 6 innings often. Terry Francona is just going to not pull them from games. Meanwhile, you have
some good things.
Yeah, you have the Rays too on both ends of this where, yeah, obviously we all know about Blake Snell getting pulled, but they're very much like, hey, we have a good bullpen. We're going to use you know, we're going to use that resource. But also, I mean, I remember Tyler Glasnow going away from Pittsburgh where he was quoted to say that he was trying to throw high four seamers and they said actively, please do not do that. And then the Rays acquire him and they say, hey, just so you know, Glasnow, we want you to use a high four seamer. He's like, thank you. Finally, right? And kind of like Jake Arrieta talking to Theo Epstein, pleading him to throw closed towards third base, stepping towards third base. And he's like, sure, whatever, go ahead. We got you for nothing. Like, do whatever you want. And Jake Arrieta went and had, you know, an amazing, 3-4 years in the bigs. So there is certainly like not necessarily about the development part, but also just their general openness and how they utilize pitchers as well.
Not to pick on the Pirates, but to take that a step further, only because what you brought up, and I don't think I'm giving anything away here, but I mean, the Pirates were specifically teaching their pitchers to be reliant on sinkers to get outs. And Jarrett Cole, Glass, a few individuals, it really wasn't ideal for their pitching style. And it was a default position. So, you know, square pegs, round holes. So Cole then, you know, once he left Pittsburgh and went to Houston, I mean, Houston has a different approach on things. And, you know, they work more on a general combination of pitches. And like for Cole, for instance, it was really more on high fastballs along with curveballs, where prior he was, you know, ordered to be dependent on the sinker for his go-to pitch. And so by, you know, adjusting the repertoire to better focus upon the strengths of the individual, you know, some organizations are going to be able to generate better end results. And, you know, obviously, you know, it wasn't working so well for the Pirates as far as an overall approach. And, you know, even right now, I guess a lot of questions are as far as how many wins will the Pirates have this year? And to a lesser extent, you're not asking that question as far as the Astros. You know, maybe history in the last few years, there's some different questions you might ask, but not as far as how they're going about that approach on the repertoire.
I think the takeaway that I get from the Pirates, and someone correct me if they have something else, but is like, don't be stubborn. Like, they were one of the first teams to really figure out the shifting and to take advantage of that. And so I think they kind of got too stubborn and like, we figured this shifting out. We need everyone to hit ground balls so we can get the most out of the shifting. And they kind of stuck to that to the detriment. So that was my takeaway, at least.
Yeah, I mean, also, I think I'm pretty sure they were one of the first to sign guys for framing. Like that was a really big priority
Yeah.
for them too, to kind of steal those strikes. But it does bring up a really important point that also Rob hit upon. All of these guys are individual human beings. And you cannot say, hey, everyone in the league's throwing elevated four seamers right now, so you should be throwing elevated four seamers. Yes, that works for Tyler Glasnow. That works for a good amount of pitchers. But like the quicker a front office individualizes a pitcher and bases their approach based on their skill set, that's when they're going to be able to achieve the most and get the most out of that pitcher.
Yeah, that was gonna be what I was gonna say. Is these guys are individual athletes who I mean, Rob, you're talking about the insurance companies. With these huge contracts, these guys are taking it into their own hands to develop themselves. If you talk to any of these private coaches, they are paid to not talk about who they work with, and they are, a lot of these athletes will never say. And so I think that's number one. And then I think, Nick, you said it's how they're being used. It's not how they're being developed. And I think that teams with, the age that we're in with statistics are able to really define, here's what this pitcher is great at, and we're going to slot them in exactly into this spot. I know that there are teams that work a lot on development, but I think that the guys, especially at the top of the game, it's in their own hands, and, they don't trust anyone other than, themselves and the team that they've employed.
Thanks, guys. I think that's about all the time we have. It was a fun discussion. I mean, getting this many of us who enjoy pitching on a call, we could probably talk the rest of the day. But I know the group has a networking event coming up, so I wanted to thank the panelists and everyone for listening. I know I had a lot of fun on this, and it'd be fun to do it again sometime. So thanks.
Thank you. This was great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Yep.